Jo Riccioni is author of The Branded. She is a novelist and short story writer. The Branded is Jo's second novel. Her first novel, The Italians at Cleat's Corner Store, was published in Australia and the UK and won multiple awards. She studied English at Leeds University in the UK and has a master's in medieval literature. She's also worked as a teacher, a corporate trainer, and a bookseller, among many other things. Thank you so much for joining us today, Jo.
Oh, thanks for having me, Val.
I'm so excited to be talking to you about The Branded. I'm seeing this everywhere. I'm hearing so many people talk about it. Even though it's for young adults, I'm hearing not only young adults, but adults who are reading it, absolutely loving it. I'm seeing it in bookshops. Oh my goodness, this is going to be huge. So tell the people who haven't got their hands on a copy yet, what is The Branded about?
Okay. Well, I should be practiced at this really because I just came from Adelaide Supernova a few weeks ago, and we had to practice. I had to practice my one-line pitch. So basically, The Branded is, if you'd imagine Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale meeting Mad Max set in a Game of Thrones world. So
I love that description.
If you want a bit more information, basically my world is has been decimated by a virus about a century earlier, and survivors are divided into the majority who have the scars of this virus, which manifest as markings on their skin called brands, and then a small minority of people who are pure skinned, who are immune to disease and a lot bigger and stronger. And the women in this society who are pure skinned are obviously prized as breeders. And my twin sisters, Osha and Nara, are being kept in a citadel in the north of the continent, where they are indulged and they have, surrounded by luxury, but it comes at a price. They are kept effectively incarcerated and used as breeding machines for the ruling elite. So my book takes place when they decide they're going to turn back to try and escape and go back to the woods where they grew up, because they're orphans, because they don't like the future that is in store for them. And on the way, they to be able to do this, they befriend a branded servant who is from the south of the country, who's quite untrustworthy. They don't really know whether they can really trust what he has to say, but he seems to know an awful lot about them, and they're not quite sure why. Anyway, when they go on the run with him, they get ambushed by wasteland traders, and they end up on a long adventure south, where they make lots of discoveries about themselves, about inherent powers that they're starting to feel that they have, and also about the world that they thought they knew, which turns out not to be true.
Now, I want to talk more about the world and how you built it and all of the things that go in it, because there is so much you need to think of, not only terminology, but geography, different classes, different groups, and all of that. But before we get into that, this is your second novel. And your first novel was an adult literary fiction novel, The Italians at Cleat's Corner, and it was it won awards. It was highly regarded, and this is such a different style and tone and audience kind of book. Why the departure?
Okay, well, I think that first novel, everybody has that first novel in them where they know it's the book that led them to writing. And The Italians was my book. It was it was loosely based on my family history, so I felt an urgency to write it because I wanted to do due diligence to my family history. But my background actually was medieval literature. I studied a master's in medieval literature at university, and I always knew that I wanted to work in that field, really. But I guess when I wrote this literary novel, it did quite well. I had an editor waiting for a second novel, and I had this expectation. I won residencies to go on my, to go and write the second novel, and I had this kind of expectation that I was this literary writer. I also wrote short stories that did very well and won quite a lot of accolades. So I had this kind of expectation that I was this literary writer. But what happened when I went on residency with my second novel was that it died underneath me, basically. I got to about 50,000 words and I realized it was making me really, really unhappy. I'd chosen a subject that was quite close to home. That was something that had happened to me. And I think it was just too close for comfort. And I spoke to my writers group, who are this amazing bunch of women who I've been meeting for like 15 years. And they said, Jo, just go away and write something that makes you happy, because this book is not making you happy. And actually, we're not enjoying reading it that much either. So I went, okay then. So I went away, and I had already been sort of playing with this idea that I wanted to, I mean, I love The Handmaid's Tale. When I studied it at university, it had only been out for about 5 or 6 years. And I did a feminist perspectives and on literature course. And I remember thinking, oh, this is such a great novel. And I think it would be really great if it was written for younger readers, you know, like, because then years later, I had my daughter, she was a teenager, and I started reading a lot of the YA fantasy that she was reading. And, you know, I remember thinking this Handmaid's Tale thing would be a great, or the themes of the Handmaid's Tale would be great for a YA audience, because a lot of girls are, you know, getting their periods for the first time. They're wondering about who they are as women. You know, is motherhood essential? You know, what defines us as women? And my daughter was struggling with that in particular. You know, she's quite a bright girl, and she, remember her going through a lot of the feelings I had when I was that age. And yeah, so anyway, that's a long way of saying that I had these ideas bubbling around. I wasn't necessarily a literary fiction writer, but I'd kind of fallen into this groove, which didn't eventually sit right with me. And I went away and had a go at writing this YA, fantasy book, and it just poured out of me. I loved it, had great laughs writing it, which I think comes across in the writing, because it's pacey and it's full of fun. And and that's what I wanted. It freed me basically as a writer.
That's wonderful that your writers group gave you that encouragement and permission almost to go and write something that you love. Now, even though you had this idea in your head from years ago about, you know, this kind of world or this kind of book or those kinds of themes, did you know immediately, okay, the thing I'm going to love writing is that? Or did you try a few things before you realized that was definitely the thing that was going to pour out of you?
No, I didn't. I'm not a big explorer, and I'm not a big starter. Even in the Myers-Briggs world of personality types, I'm a completer finisher. I'm a kind of like, I'm going to milk this baby for all it's worth, and if it doesn't work, then so be it. But yeah, so I kind of started on that story and I ended with that story. And but I guess I do quite a lot of thinking before I actually put any pen to paper or, you know, fingertips to keyboard. I think about it a lot. I'm mulling it over. And like a lot of writers, I start with a kind of image that doesn't go away, an image that's stuck with me. And it was these girls in the snow in a wagon being ferried against their will, all shoved together in this wagon, racing across the snow. And that image was my very first image that visited me for this book. And it's the one I based the whole book around.
That is such a powerful image and there's so many layers to that image. That's fantastic. Do you know where the image came from?
No, I'm not sure whether I dreamt it or whether I just imagined it, daydreamed it, you know, I don't know. But yeah, I mean, I think the Mad Max, I loved watching Mad Max, and I love snowy, you know, Northern Hemisphere type settings, the Game of Thrones, you know, the Winterfell type setting. So maybe it was just the convergence of lots of different influences.
So once you decided, okay, I'm going to write this, and you say that it poured out of you, what did that period of time look like? Were you writing full time? Were you writing all day? Were you writing in bits and pieces? How long was that period, and what part of your day or week did you dedicate to writing?
Yeah, so I've always been a part-time worker. So I worked in a bookshop for 10 years. And then in the last 2 years, I've been a sex educator. But it's always been
different.
part-time. Yeah, slightly different. yeah, but it's always been part-time. I mean, I do a lot of other jobs as well, like teaching and like lecturing and you know, interviewing and
And
stuff.
I just want to clarify to listeners that when Joe's referring to her being a sex educator, you are educating young people, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
in schools as a visiting
Mm-hmm.
expert. Yeah. So yeah, so I've always been, and there has been a very small period in my life when I had small children where I could, and they were in kindy, I could write full time, and I found it was nowhere near as productive as I thought it was going to be. I actually probably did less than I do now working a part-time job. But I still think that, I'm always absolutely in awe of these people who work full time and then
Yeah.
write their
So
novel.
what did your day look like then? You say that you work part-time, but you needed to obviously write, you were writing this novel. How many hours a day or week or whatever
Yeah, so
were you dedicating to it?
I'd have between 2 and 3 days, depending on my week. I didn't have fixed days that I worked. So some weeks I'd have 2 days where I could dedicate to writing, and other times I'd have 3 days. But regardless of that, I'm a 5 a.m. writer. And I know, I met Maria Lewis recently, and she said, "Oh my God, there's no way I'm getting up for love nor money at 5 a.m. for anyone." But I'm like, yeah, no, I have to because it's my clearest time. That liminal space. I get up straight away. All I do is get a cup of tea and then I go straight to the computer. And I do the Hemingway thing where I leave my paragraph halfway through, so a sentence halfway, so that I can pick it up straight away. I'm not staring at a blank
But
screen.
you're a completer. You're a completer.
So yeah, well, no, that's up until I get to the end of the book. Yeah, but I do when I'm drafting raw material. I try to leave it half undone at the end so that I know I can pick it up quickly the next morning. I don't like. I mean, I've done a course with Sue Wolf before where she does that stream of consciousness writing where you sort of get into your groove through just writing words. I can't write. I can't do it. I have to be working in the book straight away. I don't want to, I mean, I think I do the warm up, but I'm doing the warm up in the book.
So how many hours do you write for from 5 a.m.?
I will write, and now my kids are, old enough to look after themselves. I will write from 5 until whenever I need to start work, and often I start work at 9:30. So I'll write from 5 until 8:30, say, and then or on days when I'm got a whole day free, I'll write from 5 until I'll have breakfast. I might stop at 9:30 and have breakfast then. So I do those hours, which is my most productive for raw material. Then I'll have breakfast, I'll go and do some exercise, walk the dog, and then I'll come back and do some more. But on my days when I'm writing, I can do 8 hours easily. And I know a lot of people can't. They say 4 hours for me is enough, but I'm a kind of intense writer. I'll write intensely, but then I'll have periods where I'm not writing at all.
Mm-mm.
So
So
I
now
have seasons.
let's talk about the world that that these girls are in. There's so much to it, as I mentioned. Apart from geography, there's the different types of people. There's obviously different characters, but there's also terminology. Words that you've determined that you've made up that refer to certain things. To what extent do you build the world either in your head or written down or whatever at the start before you start writing, or are you building it as you're writing? And if so, doesn't that end up with some bits of confusion and inconsistency along the way?
Yeah, I mean, some of it's there before you start. Like some of it, that you're in a kind of medieval world. So you have an idea of the way they're going to speak. And you have an idea roughly of their world order or world view. Are they going to be religious? Are they going to, think the world is square? Are they going to, are they going to have what kind of role are women going to have in this society? What are the rules around? So you kind of set parameters, but they do develop as you go along because you come across plot points and you go, well, how would they react? Okay, well, I'm going to make it so that there's this rule that women are not allowed to go outside the boundary of the citadel without a ward or a company accompanying them, which is like a guard. So I'm going to have that rule. And then the rules sort of develop and become a lot more advanced. As far as the language, special words go, the key to it with fantasy is to not bombard the reader with too many unusual words to begin with, because it turns them off. They can't keep track. And editors are very good at picking you up on this, actually. They don't like it if you use too many weird terminology or world-specific terminology. But, it's a bit like when you drop a foreign language word into a literary fiction novel. It's fine that the reader doesn't know what that word exactly means if they can tell within the context of the paragraph roughly what it means, and you're not doing it too often. So I kind of think that's a similar rule with fantasy world. They don't have to know exactly. You don't have to go, oh, well, these more women who are pure skinned, who can have babies. You don't need to explain it straight away. You can just let the explanation come later on in the context of the story. So there's a bit of a skill to that, and sometimes you have to go back and edit that to make it a little bit flow a bit better. But yeah, making up the words is the fun part, right?
Yes. So this book this novel, this whole story pours out of you. And you obviously must have thought, this is definitely the book I was supposed to write. What happened then? Because you weren't contracted to write this book. You were doing it to free your soul, in a sense.
Yeah. So it was the first time I'd not had an editor waiting for a book, because with my first novel, I got signed when I only had 30,000 words. So that's quite unusual for writers. They, most people's first novel, they have that luxury of just doing it on their own time span, writing it exactly the way they want to write it before they put it on submission, and then they have to start making editorial changes and whatever. I didn't have that. I had an editor already reading parts of it as I went along and influencing it. It was kind of a bit like having a mentorship with an editor as I wrote that novel. But with this novel, because I knew my publisher didn't accept fantasy, I knew they weren't going to take it. So I knew I was back to square one, which, does take a bit of guts, actually, to just flip the bird at the whole publishing industry and go, well, okay, I've written a literary fiction novel, and now I'm just going to start again with a different thing. But I did. Effectively, that's what I had to do. And so I went along to a launch of one of Jay Kristoff's novels. And I met Garth Nix, who was interviewing Jay. And while Jay was sort of signing copies of his book and the audience were busy, Garth was sitting there doing nothing. And I sort of, me being me, I just went up to him and started having a chat and said, can I pick your brains? Because I knew Garth had been a publicist in his day, as well as an agent, I think, as well. So I said, look, what should I do? I've changed genres and I've got this fantasy manuscript. And what would be your advice? Should I go for an agent? Because I've never had an agent. And he goes, yeah, definitely go for an agent and try for the US first. So I did, and I sent it out to about 10 agents in the US, and I got 2 full manuscript requests, but they took forever. I mean, I'm talking like 8 months, 9 months before they even got back to me. And in that time frame, I got impatient, like a lot of writers do. And I'd met with my first novel, Scribe had given it to an agent called Catherine Drayton, who was a specialist in selling foreign rights to try and sell the rights to the US and and Europe. And I'd met Catherine, and I thought, I'm just going to send it to Catherine, see what she says, and see whether she likes it or not. And she took it on, and she said, I'm just going to send it to my assistant in the US to see what she says, because I'm not really convinced. And then she sent it to her assistant, and luckily her assistant, Claire Friedman, said, yeah, definitely take this one. So I was so grateful that she had backup telling her to take it. But then the moment they took it, I was working with an agent who was very editorially hands-on, and she said, look, it's too Handmaid's Tale. I don't think I can sell it in its current form. I want you to change the fertility theme to a virus theme. Now, this is before COVID, right? So I then went away. She said, how long do you think it will take you to do it? And I said, I'll need 6 months because I'm working, and, so I went away, and in that 6 months, I rewrote the whole manuscript, and COVID hit.
Oh my God.
Oh my God, nobody want to read a virus manuscript. But luckily, I hadn't made it about a virus. I'd made it about the fallout of a society getting over a virus. So it was like, what happens to society that has been segregated by, those who have been exposed to the virus and those that haven't. So it wasn't really a pandemic book. It was about just a tenuous link to viruses. And really, the fertility theme is still very, very strong.
Yes.
And weirdly enough, when Catherine finally sold the manuscript to Pantera, that was what they loved about it. So I went back and put it all back in again. So yeah.
So you took the 6 months to tweak it, and then is that when Catherine sold it to Pantera?
Yeah, it went on submission to the US. She tried the US first, but it was just a hard market to crack. She's still trying now to sell those rights to the US. And of course, what I didn't understand about rights, which everybody in all my family are in the UK, and they're saying, when are we going to get your book? We can't buy your book here. And I said, yeah, well, Catherine's just told me that if you sell to your Australia, New Zealand rights, the UK don't want you have to have huge sales in Australia and New Zealand before the UK will buy it, because Australia and New Zealand represent 40% of the UK's market share. So unless you've got a high selling book, they're not going to take it unless you've already sold, if you've already sold ANZ rights. So yeah, we're in a bit of a catch-22 now, but I trust my agent. She's an expert in the field. She knows what she's doing. So, and if it's not this book, it might be another book. Who knows? I don't know. But I've had fun writing it, and book 2's on the way. So
yes. So talk to me about book 2, because did you already know when you started this that there was going to be a book 2?
Yeah, I did. I wrote it as a duology. But I put it on spec with just the first book written. And my agent said, that's the other thing that she asked me to change. She said, I want you to make it one book, because one book is easier to sell than series books at the moment. And that's pretty much a consensus across the board, that if you've got a standalone fantasy, it's going to be easier as a debut writer. Not if you're an experienced writer, that's a different matter. But if you're a debut writer and you're writing fantasy or spec fic, you're more likely to sell it if it's standalone to begin with, because they don't want to run the risk of launching a book and then it dies, it doesn't sell, and you've still got another book to get out. So when I met Pantera and we were doing the meeting about whether they were going to buy it or not, they said, this seems like it's going to be 2 books. I have to say, it doesn't feel like it fits in one book. And I said, well, that's because it was 2 books. And they said, okay, let's make it 2 books. So then I went and separated the manuscript again. So there's a lot of work in changing this manuscript several times. But the beauty of that was that I had half the second book already written, because I'd shoved it into the first book. So yeah, it did help with being able to write. And I'm just waiting for the edits back now, structural edits back on book 2.
Okay, so you've written book 2, you're waiting on structural edits. Are you already writing your next book after that?
I should be, but I'm not, because I'm getting my head around social media and promotions.
Okay, so you mentioned that you spent 10 years as a bookseller.
Yeah.
What did you learn from that informed your writing?
Oh, so many things. If you can be a bookseller and still be a writer, you have to have guts to do it, because I'd get so excited unpacking the new receiving boxes and putting up all the new face outs for all the new new releases, and a lot of my friends' books were in those new releases, and 6 weeks later I'd be taking them down, packing them up, sending them back, because they're pretty much a novel has the lifespan of a pot of yogurt. So if they're not selling by that stage, you kind of like, you're not going to be ordering anymore, and a lot of them you'll only keep 2 and you'll send the rest of them back.
And in your time, what did you notice were the things that made people buy?
Word of mouth, the buzz of readers getting behind a book. And I think TikTok's a classic example of old books suddenly going off because TikTokers are getting behind certain authors, certain book series or whatever, and they're bringing them back to life again. And so, would get a lot of people coming into the shop saying, my friends read this and said, I've got to read it. We would do a lot of hand selling as well. There'd be favorites that booksellers would have that we would hand sell a lot of, and we'd always keep copies. So if you can
What do
get
you mean by hand sell?
hand selling is you get someone coming in saying, look, I'm looking for a book. I love books set in Italy. And you'll go, I've got the exact book for you. And it'll be the one that you sell for people who love European romances or something like that. Or you'll get a fantasy reader coming in and saying, I've read everything. Can you give me something new? And I'll say, yeah, I've got the exact book for you. And it will be one you keep on you personally, make sure you always have stock of, so that you can satisfy that reader's need. And if writers can get a bookseller on side like that, it can make a huge difference to your sales. Huge difference. Yeah.
So you not only have worked in a bookstore, you've also been a high school teacher.
Yeah, years ago.
Yes. And so what do you enjoy about teaching young people? Because one of the things that you're doing for the Australian Writers Centre in 2023 is you are running our Teenage Creative Writers program, which is so exciting, because I just know that your passion is going to be infused into these young writers. What do you enjoy about, teaching writing, let's be specific, to young people?
Yeah, I mean, I just love the potential of young people, and the fact that, you can influence so much in how they believe in themselves, what they believe they're capable of. I mean, I had amazing teachers at school. I went to quite a rough state school in the UK, but the teachers were so passionate and so good at their jobs. And they made the difference. No one in my family had ever gone to university, and not many people in my school made it to university. And these teachers, recognized the ability and got those kids to where they needed to be. And I thought, what an amazing way to spend your life. I didn't think of teaching as being like, oh, those who can do and those who can't teach. I think that's such a horrible thing to say about a teacher, because a teacher, really good teacher, career teacher, can just change people's lives, And I remember thinking that that I didn't really have much confidence as a teenager to think that I could be a writer. So I did the next best thing, which was I became a reader and studied literature, and then became a teacher. But what I would like to be able to tell my teenage students is, if you want to write now. Don't wait until you think you're financially stable, or you've got a baby and you're pregnant, you've got time up your sleeve. That just doesn't happen. If you want to write, do it now, because it's a lifelong craft that you need to learn and practice.
Wonderful. Coming back to The Branded, your incredible book, what was the most challenging thing about it? And then what was the most rewarding thing about it, as in the writing process I'm talking about?
Okay, so this is before readers have given you feedback.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay, so the most challenging thing about it was, I think it was working the edits, because I did an agent edit, and then I did a publisher's edit. So, and several of those. So it was almost like I'd done one round of edits, and then the publisher was almost taking me back to go and put things back in. Do you know what I mean? So that was very frustrating.
What kept you going? What kept the faith? I know people who would have just gone, oh, stuff it.
Well, I mean, there are writers who would have said to the agent, no, I'm not changing it. I'm going to just go and look for another agent. But I trusted my agent. She has an amazing reputation, and I agreed. I kind of agree. I don't think they pull this stuff out of their bums. They know what they're talking about. And she knew best how she could sell that book. She has, decades of experience on me, so I'm not going to question her. And yeah, it was work, but I could see that it was going to make it a better book. And then when it got to the publishing stage, basically what keeps you going is the fact that it's going to get published. You're going to get paid for it. So yeah, that, and also by that stage I'd fallen in love with my characters, and that's probably speaks to the second part of your question, which is what's the most rewarding thing, is just the characters just growing and growing and growing with every edit, you know, not even at the structural stage, even at the line edit stage, I'm tweaking things that bring out tiny little extra thing about that character. And, you know, I just feel as though I know my characters inside and out now, you know, and I love them. I can't wait to get back to them. Actually, it's really funny. I woke up the other night and you know, when you've written a book, you don't necessarily go back and read it in its published form because you've lived in it for so long. And I know I'm working on book 2, but I had the burning desire to sort of read the sex scene again in my book 1 because I wanted to sort of like, I wonder what it does read like, because somebody had said, oh, they really enjoyed it. And I went back and reread it in the middle of the night and I was like, yeah, I mean, this is good. I like it. So that was a good reaction. I think I could make it better. I could still make it better, but you know, it was yeah, it was kind of nice to read it as a reader.
Maybe it's not going to be a duology. Maybe it's going to go even further when you become so attached to your characters and fall in love with them. Sometimes you want them to continue, right?
Well, I think that's probably what happens with authors and how they can be convinced into going back to the world again and again, because it's not some authors, it's the world, isn't it? It's not necessarily the character, but they just want to stay in that world. Yeah, I'm not sure. I've got lots of shiny new ideas going on at the moment, so I'm not sure that I really want to revisit.
Okay, so you're meant to be writing the next book. You finished book 2. You're meant to be writing your next new fresh book, but you're kind of being distracted by doing a few other things. Do you have an idea though? Maybe you haven't started writing, but do you know what it's going to be about?
Yeah, roughly I have some, well, like I said, shiny new ideas. I haven't written any words on the page. Well, I actually have a couple of years ago, I wrote some words on the page that I might revisit. But my ideas come as kind of, now I'm becoming a more experienced writer, they come as kind of pitch ideas. Like, so I'll get, you know, 2 books that I'm absolutely in love with, and I'll think, what would happen if you know, if those 2 books mated, if you themes from that and this world, and then got this other theme involved. I think a lot of writers are doing that now, because you know, the way that you read the books, you can see the influences, but they've used all these influences to create a whole new world and a whole new you know, plot. So it's not you're not copying, it's just that you're feeding, you know, the world and the readership is all feeding off itself, you know, and kind of creating this new niche. I mean, I one of the things I love at the moment is these sort of genre mashes. So you'll get, you know, like a medieval murder mystery with a fantasy element involved, with magic involved. Or just finished reading Freya Marsk's A Marvelous Light, because she was at Supernova with me, and just an amazing book. It's like Edwardian queer romance, so it's like E.M. Forster with magic. with people who can do spells. Yeah.
Let's talk about, you made reference to Supernova. For people who don't know, what is Supernova, and what do you enjoy about going to events like that as an author?
Well, Supernova is a comic kind of, it started off with comics, a convention. It's now become it's a place where fans can go to meet actors from genre-based series like The Walking Dead and Game of Thrones, and they can meet the voice actors from some of their favorite animated series like My Hero Academia and lots of other series, and also meet fantasy authors as well. So they have panels of writers. So they'll have a section where they call it Literary Legends, and you all line up with other writers, and you sell your books through. Well, you talk about your books and sign them, and then they buy them through the bookshop. But there's a lot of self-published authors there as well. And then there's people who make badges and T-shirts, and there'll be people there who make samurai swords and armor, and it's just like a whole fantasy nerd convention, basically. And what is so beautiful about going to these events is not only do you meet fantastic writers and artists, but you also, and you make connections which can help your career. You also meet fans, and fantasy fans have got to be some of the most gorgeous in the world. You know, this is not a literary festival. There isn't a green room where everybody's kind of like standing off and going, you know, how much marketing dollars did they get? Oh, they got a hardback. How can they got a hardback? You know, and that kind of like sort of literary peevishness that you sometimes get. This is like fantasy fans who just come running up and going, oh my God, I loved your book, you know, and tell me about your new book. You know, it's kind of no holds barred enthusiasm, basically.
Oh, how rewarding. That's lovely. Now I could actually talk to you all day, Joe, but we've coming to the end of our episode. So I always end with, what are your top 3 tips for aspiring writers who would love to be in a position where you are one day?
Okay, top 3 tips. Okay, first tip is if you want to write it, you're going to have to carve out the time, and that means sacrificing things. So that sometimes means not going for lunch on a Saturday with your girlfriends or your friends. It might mean getting up at 5 in the morning, or it might mean staying up till 12 at night. You got to carve some hours out, and you got to do it regularly. The more often you're in the book, the more the book will live for you. I think if you have big chunks of time away from the book, it can really take you a long time to get back into it. Second thing is do courses and get feedback, because you can be writing and writing and writing, but unless you get feedback, you're not going to know how people are going to receive your work. And then just perseverance. Just people get rejection after rejection after rejection. Don't let it get you down. If you want to write. But my other advice is, if you want to write a novel. Don't mess around with short stories. I wrote short stories because I love short stories. So write the thing you want to write and study that, because there's so many different areas: screenplays, poetry, short stories, whatever, features, focus on the area that you love, you think you really want to write, and because it's a craft that you need to practice. And then read other people's, but don't just read within your genre. I mean, I'd read widely outside of genre, because it can influence you in your own genre as well, by seeing what other people are doing outside of your chosen genre. So they're my bits of advice for what they're worth.
Brilliant. Congratulations on the Branded, and thank you so much for your time today, Joe.
Thanks, Val.